Right. Our next reader is not a debut novelist. He's published one other called Soon I Will Be Invisible.
Invincible.
Ah, that's why I can see you. All right, Soon I Will Be Invincible.
That's the most common misreading. The second most common is, for some reason, Soon I Will Be in Pittsburgh.
Okay. All right. This guy, his brother has read here before, but I'll leave that out for now. He's this is his second novel. Like his colleague here, he's published not in genre publishing, but in sort of mainstream, which I think says a lot about the attention mainstream is playing to to imaginative and speculative literature. He's also been published in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Granta. If you don't know what Granta is, I have no sympathy with you whatsoever. Who's this? What does she want with us? Huh? Ah, look at
That
that.
might help.
Wow.
Get unplugged.
Again.
Technical difficulty.
She works for PG&E, and
There we go.
she's here. At any rate, his new novel is, I believe it's about a game designer, but it's called You, and I would like to welcome Austin Grossman.
Thank you. I'm going to start with a section from early in the novel. You, like Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore, is about a young man who gets a job.
A rare event.
Well, mine is set in 1997, the distant past, when such things were possible. He gets a job at a video game studio. But it's actually a studio started by some friends of his that he's known for a long time. And the section I'm going to read is sort of the primal origin scene of their game studio, which is it's a scene from back when they were in high school, in about 1983, and they were first learning to code in their high school intro to programming class, where they were taught COBOL for some reason. And it talks about sort of their first sort of stirrings or thinking about wanting to make computer games and why they wanted to do it and where it was all supposed to lead. So they're driving around, as one does, at night in somebody's car, not really going anywhere, sort of talking aimlessly. I honestly don't know who brought up the issue of the ultimate game. It was just one of those topics, like whether the plot of the Terminator makes sense, or if magic can ever be real, or if it would be better to have a robot girlfriend or a real one. But at some point we got around to the question of what would be the most amazing video game you could possibly make. And we had a bunch of terms. We called it real D&D, or the dueling machine, or the Matrix. The word holodeck had not been invented yet. But Darren jumped on the question. It would have to be in 3D. No, maybe it would all be holograms, like they had in the chess game in Star Wars, or in Larry Niven's Dream Park, or maybe something we had to be weirder, like Neuromancer, where it's wired into your skull. And you do things just by doing them, Darren said. And Simon nodded vehemently, sharing the same dimly imagined picture in an electronic world springing up around us, a neon Eden. If only the hardware would get faster, or interfaces would get better, or graphics, or if only time itself would just go faster so we get to the future already. At the time, even Wolfenstein 3D, the earliest, crudest harbinger of real-time 3D gaming, was 9 years away. But Simon argued, okay, forget about the technology challenge, the full-body interface, the 3D display, all the inexhaustible problems of graphical detail, counterfeiting the complexity of human facial expression, interpreting natural human speech. Let those problems be solved or not. It didn't matter. There was still, and there would always be, the problem of storytelling. The you in the game you should wake up in a world with total choice. You could go searching for a legendary jewel, or you could stay home, or you could make paper dolls, or run out into the street and punch a stranger in the nose, and somehow the computer would cope. But in a normal game, a real video game, you couldn't do it. The world has a kind of narrative channel to it, a single story that you can follow, but you can never escape. And at some point, sooner or later, but usually very, very soon, the world in the game runs out of the stories it can tell. And every time you run into that point, there's a jarring, illusion-breaking bump that tells you it's just a game. So what is the thing we need? There's a story, but you choose what it is, and you make it yourself, and the world is full of tools for doing that. And you can follow a path into the forest, or you can turn around and you can go home and cut the king's head off because you decided you always hated the old bastard, and you're sick of this story, and you'd want to be somebody else. And then you cut the forest down, and you use the wood to build the highest possible tower and reach the sun, or you build a dam, and then you flood the kingdom, and you kill everybody, and then you let the water out, and you just collect all the treasure. And maybe that's not a great story, but that's your story. And what we want is the storytelling engine that keeps building the world as you make your choices, and that makes sure it feels like a story. And so when you pick up a phone and you dial a phone number, and it reaches a widow in distress or a private detective agency that's hiring, or you walk outside and you break a branch off a tree and you can tie a string to it, and you can walk to a lake, and then if you catch a fish, the third fish you catch would have a ring in its stomach engraved with strange writing. And in this world, all the time, you'd be wrapped, absorbed in the story, in the gently paradoxical, bootstrapped state of semi-belief that video games create, where you're just enough outside yourself to be somebody else, and just enough in yourself so that you're living the story as if it were a real life. And maybe that's a naive way to think about computer games, but it doesn't make the need for it any less real. And yeah, maybe it's impossible to make, but they'd already started. They'd already made Realms 1.0, which is their first computer game. And that was just the beginning. They'd make 2.0 and 20.0, and they'd make cities and kingdoms and systems within systems and interfaces within interfaces, and princesses and starships and submarines and floating cities and laughing gods and blackest hells, and on, because you're never satisfied, and you don't have to be, because there would always be something else over the next hill, behind the turning in the road, down the dark hallway and into the next room, and somewhere in there you'll escape at last. You'll escape yourself, and forget, and forget, and forget, and live in a story forever. And we drove around town until it was past midnight, and it was then that I first clearly remember Darren saying, "We have to do this." This was our rebellion. We would walk out on reality itself and the raw deal it gives even the luckiest of us. Fucking leave it and go on an adventure. And in the dark of the station wagon, I couldn't see faces, but I felt sure everyone had the same thoughtful expression. Everybody knew, nobody knew how to say it, that how Simon's mother was kind of crazy and poor, and Lisa's parents were rich but had no interest in her, and Darren was terminally pissed off, and no one seemed to be able to put a finger on it, but I was never going to be as happy as I was supposed to be. Everybody had a reason to want out. People with any sense of the dramatic would have shared a drink or said a vow or cut their palms and made a blood pact. But spoken or not, it's the only vow I ever made or ever would. The only true moment I ever had of lunatic ambition. And it didn't seem to matter, because who needed to share blood when we shared the exact same thought from the moment we saw what a Commodore PET computer could do. Like the Lumiere brothers seeing the flickering image of a locomotive pulling into a railroad station and sensing the enormity of the moment, we recognized that this miracle illusion would be the currency of the imagination of the next 100 years or more.